iTrain does a good job of automatically converting the old layout file to 5.1. But there is a new parameter in 5.1 called clearance that replaces margin when the positions mode is used in a block, and it will require our manual intervention to ensure that its values are set correctly. In this tutorial we explain what clearance is, why it has replaced margin, and how to set it up. Welcome back. Okay, so we have installed 5.1 and converted our first layout file when we pressed the save button. When iTrain converts your layout file, it will attempt to place a viable value in the clearance field. But clearance is a completely different concept compared to margin, and so difficult for iTrain to convert automatically. Therefore, we need to check the clearance values for each block to ensure appropriate values have been entered. So why has the margin parameter been replaced by clearance when positions is used? Well, the old parameter margin was rather overcomplicated, having a value that varied depending on things like the type of block that was used and the expected speed of the train entering that block, and the scale of the layout in which it is used in. It also had no positional information to tell us where the margin is in the block, which made it difficult to visualize and therefore understand. And it had no directional component, so a value cannot be set depending on which direction the train is travelling. We covered margin in tutorials number 14, 34 and 35, with tutorial 35 providing the most complete explanation of its use. Essentially, its purpose was to provide a margin of error to ensure that sufficient room was available around the position where the train stopped in the block to allow for differences in the stopping positions of different trains, so that another train could pass safely across an attached turnout. So if the front of the train stopped here, there was enough space to allow another train to use this path, and at the rear of the train there was enough space to allow a train to use this path, with some wriggle room to allow for variations in the actual stopping position of the train. The new clearance parameter achieves essentially the same thing as margin, but has been greatly simplified and includes both a positional and a directional component. The result is something that is easier to set up and understand, and more flexible and efficient in its use. Gone are all the different values depending on the layout scale, the type of block and the train's speed. Instead, we just set a value based on how much space should be left free at the beginning of the block, seen from from the direction of travel, so that when a train has stopped in the block, there is sufficient space between the rear of the train and the turnout prior to the block, so that the turnout can be safely released and allow another train to pass without the risk of collision. So it determines the amount of space, or the clearance, or the danger zone if you prefer, and only at the rear of the train. If the train is travelling in the other direction, that danger zone is not then defined by clearance, it is defined by the stopping position of the train travelling in that direction. The clearance is now at the other end of the block, which is now the start of the block when travelling in this direction. Therefore, we always need to be mindful of the direction of travel. So with clearance, we now have directional information. We can define it for direction next and direction previous. And we also have positional information. It is focused only on the space at the beginning of the block, which equates to the space at the rear of the train when the train has entered the block and comes to a stop. Therefore, in effect, what we now have in a block is the stop position defined in the block properties for each direction that determines how close the front of the train gets to the turnout ahead and still allow the turnout to be safely released and allow another train to pass without causing a collision. And the clearance position, also defined in block properties in each direction, that determines how close the rear of the train can get to the turnout behind and still allow the turnout to be safely released and allow another train to pass without causing a collision. So notice that the risk of a glancing collision with another train only occurs at the heel or the blunt end of the turnout or slip, so either here or here. There is no risk of a glancing collision with another train stopped at the toe or sharp end of the turnout. Therefore, the heel end is the primary danger zone relating to clearance. The stop position remains unchanged during the conversion, so we do not need to alter it in 5.1. The two values, stop position and the clearance position, set the effective usable length of the block. Usable block length equals the total length of the block minus the sum of the stop position measured from the end of the block plus the clearance position measured from the beginning of the block, which gives us the usable block length. iTrain knows where the train is expected to stop and knows the length of the train. So if the train is greater than the usable length of the block, iTrain will not release the turnout near the rear of the train because the rear would be within the danger zone. Trains longer than the effective usable length of the block can of course still be allowed to stop in the block. iTrain then keeps the turnout reserved so that no other trains can use it and therefore avoids any collisions. The clearance parameter is defined in the block properties, and the easiest way to get there is to right-click on the block and select Properties. You will see the clearance parameter when the Use Positions mode is selected in either the Direction Previous tab or in the Direction Next tab. Margin is still shown in the Classic mode here, but we should all be using Positions mode for any new layouts we create, because positions provide much more flexibility in operation. Classic mode is retained for compatibility reasons on old layouts. So our focus should be on positions mode and ensuring that the clearance values are set appropriately. Where there is no turnout directly prior to a block, such as here, where the train is travelling from one block directly into another block, regardless of whether the train is stopping in this other block or not, the value for clearance at the beginning of the block that is being entered into can be left at 0 in that direction. There is no heel of a turnout at this point here, so no danger zone. Incidentally, in 5.1 it is now easier to identify direction next due to the solid arrows shown on the switchboard. Where a train enters a block from the toe end or sharp end of a turnout, the value of clearance here at the toe can also be left at 0, because there is no possibility of a glancing blow to a train stopped at this location. But if a turnout splits into 2 or more blocks, and a train in one block might collide with a train at the start of another block, then we should specify a clearance value. So as a quick sanity check of the layout, the main danger zones are at the heel end or blunt end of the turnouts, such as here, 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 here and here. A value for clearance will be needed in the direction of travel where the train runs off the heel of the turnout. For all other locations, the values can be 0, at least as a quick check before running any trains. However, look carefully for blocks that have 0 clearance at the toe end of a turnout and in which trains will stop that have a train length equal to or slightly less than the usable block length. In these blocks, a value for clearance should be set near the toe of the turnout to allow for variations in the stopping position of these long trains. Why? Well, if the train stops short of its stop position, because the train length is equal to or slightly less than the usable block length, the rear of the train will overlap the turnout. iTrain will not be aware of the overlap because it expects the train to stop exactly at the stop position and therefore believes that the train is positioned safely within the usable block length. iTrain could then choose to release this turnout, allowing it to be switched and potentially causing a short or derailing a wagon. Adding a value for clearance will create a danger zone, effectively reducing the usable block length, and therefore preventing iTrain from releasing the turnout if a long train stops short, because iTrain will calculate that the rear of the train will be within the danger zone even if the train stops exactly at its stopping position. Now, it's also possible to totally avoid this situation by ensuring that the rearmost wagon can draw current. For example, if it has lights or a resistive axle, and by installing a feedback sensor in the turnout. That sensor will then detect the current when the rear wagon is on the turnout and will send a signal to iTrain informing it not to release the turnout. So what are appropriate values for locations where clearance is needed? Well, that's for you to judge depending on the design of your layout. For my N-scale test layout here, the minimum free space at the rear of the train that prevents any collisions near the heel of a turnout is 5 centimeters. But that doesn't leave a lot of room for any variations in the stopping positions of the various trains. Therefore, an additional 1 or 2 centimeters would be wise for the clearance. So for this N-scale layout, a value of say 7 centimeters at the heel would seem appropriate, and 2 centimeters at the toe end in blocks where trains will stop that have a train length equal to or slightly less than the usable length of the block. Each train's ability to stop accurately and consistently will depend on how well its speed profile has been measured, how correctly its reaction delay has been set, and if appropriate feedback offsets have been set for the loco, and that is all down to you. Okay, so let's quickly run through the clearance settings for each block on this small layout. We'll start in block east, and in direction next, which is the solid arrow, the train enters from the toe end or sharp end of the turnout. So normally the clearance can be 0 for this location. However, because it is the toe, I need to check the usable block length against the lengths of any trains that will stop in this block. The usable block length in direction next is 79 minus 2.5 minus 0, which equals 76.5 centimetres. I have no trains of that length or very slightly shorter, so we can leave the clearance at 0. In direction previous, the train is entering directly from this block into east. So again here the clearance value can remain at 0. For the next block, in direction next, the train is entering directly from the previous block, so the clearance can be 0 here. But from direction previous, the train is entering from the heel end of the turnout, or the blunt end, so the rear of the train could stop within the danger zone. Therefore, a value of clearance should be set. So for this N scale layout, I will set it to 7 centimetres, like discussed previously. For this block, in direction previous, I will need to set a value here of 7 centimetres, and in direction next, no trains will enter from this direction, so the clearance can be left at 0, and the same for South Platform 3. In South Siding, in direction next, I will need a value of 7 centimetres and 0 in direction previous. For the West block, in direction next, we will need a value of 7 centimetres, and in direction previous, 0 centimetres. In block northwest, in direction next, it can be 0. In direction previous, the train is entering from the toe end of the block, so I need to check the usable block length against the length of any trains that may stop in this block. The usable block length in direction previous is 38 minus 2.5 minus 0, which is 35.5 centimetres. And I do have at least one train that is between 33.5 and 35.5 centimetres. So in this case, I will set a clearance value of 2 centimetres and press OK to save it. For North Platform 1, in direction next, we are at the heel end, so a value of 7 centimetres here, and also in direction previous we will need a value of 7 centimetres, and the same for platform 2. So this now means that the important clearance figures have been set, preventing possible collisions. After using the layout for a while and seeing how the trains operate and how efficiently blocks are reserved and released, and checking if any overruns or underruns are occurring, I might then want to adjust the clearance in certain blocks. For example, in some blocks where the clearance is 0, adding a clearance value has the effect of delaying the release of the previous block, because iTrain will not release the previous block until the train has cleared the clearance zone in the block it is entering, even if it is not stopping. This delay may improve the operational performance in certain circumstances, so don't be afraid to experiment. So that is clearance, a simpler, more flexible and more efficient concept that replaces margin when positions are used in a block. In the next tutorial, we look at the new way in which actions are constructed. Hope to see you then. Thanks for watching.